Representatives of international organizations, financial institutions, civil society, youth, women, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. First and foremost, I would like to thank President William Ruto, the government and the people of Kenya for the exceptional hospitality accorded to us since our arrival in this hospitable and green capital, Nairobi. The beautiful and natural environment in this country augurs well for the great success of our climate summit. The organization of this climate summit in such friendly conditions in just 6 months, thanks to the decision of the African Union Summit last February, is striking proof of the excellence of your leadership, dear friend William. I sincerely congratulate you. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le récent rapport du groupe international d'experts sur les changements climatiques
on climate change, IPCC, confirms our fears. Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world. If this phenomenon is not stopped, climate change will continue to have a serious negative impact on the growth of the African economies. Agricultural productivity has been reduced by 34% between 1961, since 1961, due to climate change, more than any other region. Hence, it will have an unbearable pressure on the food systems in Africa. African countries thus face disproportionate burdens and risks arising from unpredictable weather patterns, particularly prolonged droughts and devastating floods at all levels. Massive humanitarian crises provoke detrimental impacts on economies, health, education, peace and security, and other related risks. For example, the season 2022-2023, about 18 million people have been affected by drought in the Horn of Africa alone. Recently, tropical cyclone Fred has affected more than 1.2 million of people and caused the death of more than 700 people. It is also estimated that between 2019 and 2023, the economic loss as a result of disasters in Africa is between 20 and 35.5 billion American dollars. This gloomy list is not exhaustive. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has spared no sector. It is to be recalled that Africa has around 400 million who do not have access to clean drinking water, and about 700 million do not have access to a very good sanitation. And this also indicates, experts indicate that there is a gap, a financing gap of 11 to 20 billion dollars. So we are obviously on the verge of seeing climate degradation. It is not the only factor, and it will be wrong not to integrate this in our global analysis of the negative factors, including governance, which is at the very center. I do not want to yield to pessimism. And in the general, it is, however, fortunate that in the table we have some beacons and favorable indicators. I cannot help reminding that 600 million people do not have access to electricity, and 200 million of them do not have access to clean cooking and are exposed to all respiratory problems and diseases due to smoke. And because of climate change, we have problems in our infrastructure, and we need to develop profitable infrastructure and spend at least $160 billion per year. Indeed, it is encouraging to note that the African governments have devoted about 3.5% of their GDP to the development of infrastructure over the past 20 years. It is too little compared to some emerging countries. China and India, for example, devote 7.7 and 5.2% of their GDP, respectively, in infrastructure. We can thus see in which direction efforts have to be made. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this summit affords us an excellent opportunity to translate the climate ambitions of Africa into investment opportunities, to consolidate our voices on matters on burning issues of climate change, to prepare for the UN Climate Summit and for COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. At these meetings of global importance, Africa must, among other challenges, highlight the worrying and sometimes tragic situation in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, where droughts and floods alternate, in the Congo River Basin, with dangerous deforestation and the disastrous consequences of cyclones in southern Africa and in the island states. It is urgent that Africa comes to all these meetings with concrete proposals to be implemented without delay. I strongly reiterate my call to come to the next two meetings with precise proposals, without drowning them in literature and the usual litany on the imperative need for collective justice for Africa, where responsibility is very limited in the pollution of the world, with an inversely proportional share of the volume of global investment in the field of environment. This call for a restoration of justice for Africa would benefit from being supported by a real reform of the global financial architecture, for which a high-level panel is rightly devoted at this summit. Obviously, this reform must resolutely focus on the financial organs and structures, institutions which structure the universe, which operate far from Africa. In this desired reform, a question comes to mind: the weight of the debt and the financing gap of the SDGs. Africa alone represented a need of $1.3 billion per year for sustainable development needs by 2030, while the financing needs for SDGs in the same period were $2.5 billion for financing developing countries. Everyone knows that the public debt stock in sub-Saharan Africa at the end of 2023 was estimated at $1.1 trillion out of 650 billion SDRs mobilized. Africa received only 33 billion, which is only 4.5%. In view of these staggering figures and many others, it is clear that there is no relevant global intervention in favor of Africa without a credible solution for the crippling debt challenge of Africa. To aid the struggle, which include financing adaptation, $100 billion per year, Africa has galvanized its will in its common position through a momentum unifying African voices, and it will be a central point of our agenda in G20 as soon as we join it. However, in this struggle, Africa cannot just be satisfied with incantation. Just like for its independence, it is a challenge to rely on its own personal efforts, on its own genius, the quality and its virtues of bold, imaginative, united and interdependent leadership. I wish you full success to our deliberations. I thank you very much. Asante sana.
Excellencies, we are overwhelmed by the support that we have received for the summit, and we want to listen to each and every one of us. So I would like to plead with Your Excellencies that we stick to the agreed 5 minutes so that we can have everybody speaking to this. Next, Excellencies, out of COP27 in Egypt was the establishment of a loss and damage fund and the finalization of the details to implement the Santiago network. It was also the first time food security was recognized in the COP conversations. The Arab Republic of Egypt was a COP27 presidency, and it is my honor now to invite His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, the Prime Minister of Egypt. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Au nom de Dieu le tout clément, le tout miséricordieux, président du Kenya, distingués invités, distingués présidents, mesdames et messieurs, je veux tout d'abord vous transmettre les salutations de son Excellence le président Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, président de la République arabe d'Égypte. Il m'est un grand privilège de participer au nom de l'Égypte à cette réunion de haut niveau et je félicite son Excellence président Ruto et Kenya qui a voulu bien abriter cette réunion qui survient après le succès de la réunion de la COP 27. Mesdames et messieurs, ce sommet d'aujourd'hui survient à un moment critique de notre monde et en particulier le continent africain qui témoigne de la fréquence du changement climatique avec les vagues de sécheresse dans le Sahel et les feux et incendies et les ouragans au sud du continent et l'élévation de la température, l'élévation du niveau de la mer et de l'océan et l'élévation des températures au nord de l'Afrique. Et ceci aggrave les pressions sur nos communautés et nos pays africains. C'est pour cela que l'Égypte, à partir de son engagement pour contribuer aux efforts pour faire face au changement climatique, s'est efforcée pour avoir des résultats au cours de la conférence du Sharm el-Sheikh pour passer à l'application à travers l'accélération, la mise en place des projets et pour répondre aux besoins des pays en développement et renforcer les efforts internationaux pour passer aux économies vertes à basse émissions. L'Égypte, en tant que président de la conférence, que Sharm el-Sheikh soit un point de départ pour répondre aux attentes des pays africains pour faire face aux défis du changement climatique. Dans ce même contexte, notre conférence survient pour confirmer notre détermination à passer vers l'économie verte et à recevoir le soutien technique et financier et les investissements, ce qui permettrait de bien d'explorer toutes les richesses de nos continents, non pas uniquement dans l'investissement et le financement des projets de résilience, mais également à présenter certains financements pour faire face aux dégâts et pertes. Et je confirme le rôle qu'entreprend le comité des présidents africains et le comité des conférences, le comité des ministres de l'environnement africain pour faire face au changement climatique et ses répercussions néfastes. Mesdames et messieurs, le fait de s'élargir dans les ressources renouvelables sont au sein du modèle de développement et c'est ce qui a été bien félicité par les pays au cours des CDN et notre continent est riche par des exemples qui ont pris l'Égypte qui est arrivée à réaliser 20% de la production de l'énergie des sources renouvelables, mais nous aspirons à atteindre 40% dans ce cadre. J'aimerais bien confirmer la vision des Émirats arabes unis à travers M. Sultan El Gaber pour passer à l'énergie renouvelable. C'est une vision.
Access to finance is the bottleneck that faces Africa and developing countries to turn its dreams and plans to reality, to contribute in solving the climate issue. And meanwhile, that doesn't touch the path of development or have more burden and of debts. This is a great opportunity to deal with the financing of climate, and the Egyptian vision in this respect it has to do with the following. First, we need to reconsider the available financing instruments and to move to concessional financing and grants to accelerate the transition required. Second, we need to reconsider the capital flow to ensure that Africa should get its fair quota of financing. We need to emphasize that financing climate is an additional and a new kind of financing, and it does not take a piece of the development financing. We need to activate an active and good mechanism to use the current and existing debts to turn those debts into financing climate. In this regard, we're looking forward that Dubai meeting would be a breakthrough in the pledges of advanced countries to provide an annual amount of $100 million for climate. It is a symbolic pledge because we do have a historic responsibility. In conclusion, I'd like to re-emphasize that the nature of climate change and dealing with can only be through cooperation based on enhancing a multilateral system, based on equity and justice, bearing into consideration the specificity of each country. And I'd also emphasize what Kenya proposed as a vision to draft and to formulate our discussions in this meeting, and re-emphasize that Egypt, as head of the current session of the UN climate meeting in Dubai, the COP28, and we believe its support to build up on the outcomes of Sharm el-Sheikh and to have more outcomes. We fully support them in their efforts. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Excellencies, Africa is Europe's closest neighbor and our sister continent. Our geopolitics therefore concern each other. Europe and Africa have close economic, cultural, and geographical ties. To speak for the European Commission, I would now take this opportunity to invite Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union President. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Dear President Ruto, for hosting this Africa Climate Summit. And thank you very much for your leadership on climate action ever since you took office. I very much welcome Kenya's Climate Change Act 2023 that was launched during this summit and that puts strong emphasis on carbon markets. We fully support you on this important topic. Presidents, Prime Ministers, fellow leaders, Excellencies, I want to greet my colleague Moussa Faki, Chairman of the African Union. I want to greet the President Assoumani from the Comoros. I want to greet Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, President of the COP28, my fellow leaders, ladies and gentlemen. I am deeply honored to participate in this discussion. This summit is a crucial step to prepare the upcoming COP28 meeting and to make sure that Africa's voice resonates around the world and that Africa's priorities as a continent that is most affected by climate change are duly taken on board. Today, I'm here not only to listen to you, but also to bring Europe's offer to be your ally at COP28 and to work together on all issues on the agenda. Because however different our two continents may look, we share the same interests when it comes to climate action. We hear you, President Ruto, and dear friends, when you say that Africa's first priority is to grow your economy, yes, and lift as many people as possible out of poverty. Yes, you're so right. Climate action is part of the solution. You are part of the solution. With your huge potential for renewable energy and clean hydrogen, your critical raw materials, your incredible nature and biodiversity, and your young workforce, you can help clean up global energy systems and supply chains while creating good jobs here and economic opportunities yet that your people demand, rightly so. This is a win-win partnership which benefits Africa and the world. For instance, the benefits of expanding Africa's clean energy sector would be massive. By speeding up the transition to solar and wind power, energy sector jobs in Africa could double in a few years. And Africa could produce enough clean energy not only to power up your continent, but also to export abroad. Climate action can be one of the main drivers of Africa's growth. But for this, Africa needs massive investment. And Europe wants to be your partner, in closing this investment gap. First of all, we fully support the need for multilateral development bank reform. It is time to move from words to action, absolutely. Secondly, investment has to come. And this is why 150 billion euro in our investment plan are designated for Africa. We call it Global Gateway. They are aimed at the African continent. Global Gateway supports investments ranging from hydropower plants in the DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania, to the 1 billion euro initiative on climate adaptation and resilience in Africa, which we announced at COP27. And Global Gateway is unique in the global investment landscape. We're not only interested in extracting resources. We want to partner with you to create local value chains, to create good jobs here in Africa. We want to share European technology with you. We want to invest in skills for local workers. This is crucial for the young people, because the stronger you are as suppliers, the more Europe will diversify supply chains towards Africa, and the more we both will de-risk our economies. It's a clear win-win. Namibia, for instance, is now building a new hydrogen industry, as well as rare materials value chains in partnership with Europe. And later this morning, President Ruto and I will conclude a new hydrogen partnership between Kenya and the European Union, with the objective to further develop the green hydrogen economy and with the full support of Team Europe. This is good news for Africa and for Europe alike. So we should work very closely as partner. Yet, public money from major economies, however crucial, is not enough. And this is why we need to bring the conversation on climate financing to the global stage at COP28. Let me briefly share 3 specific points that will be discussed here in Nairobi to pave the way towards COP28. First, on attracting private investment to Africa. Second, on carbon pricing and carbon credits. And third, on setting global targets for the energy transition. On the first point, the green transition will require an unprecedented scale of private investment. Public finance will not suffice. This is true for Europe, but it is also true for emerging market and developing economies. Private capital will need to be mobilized at scale. And here, green bonds are widely recognized as providing part of the solution. This is why we just put forward a new proposal to attract private investment. It's called Global Green Bonds Initiative. We know that emerging economies can face hurdles to access capital markets, but we can change that together. Europe has the biggest and most advanced green bond market in the world, so we are ready to share our expertise with your teams on how to develop your own green bond markets, and at the same time, we will push on the investor side. Together with the European Investment Bank and our member states, we are allocating €1 billion to de-risk private investments in emerging markets. This could help to attract up to €20 billion in sustainable investment. So, let's work together on that to build and grow Africa's green bond markets, and let us bring together this crucial point to COP28. There's another solution that would unlock huge resources for climate action in Africa, and that is carbon pricing and true carbon credits. And this is my second point. I believe, as you do, President Ruto, that setting a price on carbon emissions is one of the most efficient and one of the most effective tools in our hands, because it fosters innovation by the private sector, that's crucial, because it makes heavy polluters pay a fair price, that is necessary, and because it creates revenues that can support the clean transition in developing countries. That's what we need. And this includes also to include the carbon sinks that have been mentioned, and you are rich in carbon sinks here, and to reward this contribution. We have to get there. We will discuss this in more detail in the next session, so let us work together to bring a proposal for global carbon pricing and true carbon credits at COP28. And finally, on global energy goals, if we are to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, we have to speed up the global energy transition. That means if we want to match our goals, we need to triple renewable energy capacity, and we need to double energy efficiency by 2030. This sounds bold, but it is doable. If we step up global investment in renewables, this would make clean energy more affordable for all countries, including here in Africa. And this is why COP28 President Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber and I champion an initiative for global targets for the energy transition to be achieved collectively. Because only what gets measured gets done. So, the global goals will provide a benchmark to track the progress and to attract even more private investment. So, I look forward to working with you on this and much, much more. I hope that Africa and Europe will join forces to reach a global agreement at COP28. Ladies and gentlemen, these three proposals may look bold, they may look impossible to achieve. But in the beautiful words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." We have a huge responsibility to fight climate change for the good of our children, for the good of our grandchildren. And I wrote down these beautiful words of the African youth yesterday. Our countries are burning and drowning. As you're not here to save us, we have to trust you now. So, my friends, let's reward the trust of these young people and show responsibility. Let's join forces for COP28. Many thanks. I feel so honored for being invited. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi African Leaders Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action, which we hope that we will get from you, Excellencies, tomorrow, will take a tour of the United Nations Secretary-General Summit, then eventually to the UAE for COP28. What better way to start preparing the way for the declaration than by having the COP28 President-designate, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, the COP28 President-designate, to address this summit. Dr. Al-Jaber is the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, President Ruto, Your Excellencies, distinguished ministers, is evidently championing a new vision for climate action. We're gathering here in Nairobi just 3 days before the UNFCCC releases the findings of the first global stocktake. And let's just face it, we already know that the world is way off track, and we know what this report will actually say and what it will conclude. The world is losing the race to secure the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the world is struggling to keep 1.5 within reach. Collectively, we must admit that we are not delivering the results we need in the time we need them. We must also accept that business as usual is simply not working, and that business as usual will not allow for a paradigm shift. We need a smart, pragmatic disruption We need an integrated approach that delivers transformational progress. And we need a plan that leaves no one behind. That is why I have been and I continue on calling on all parties to unite around a plan of action that is fully inclusive, a plan of action that fast-tracks a just, responsible, orderly, and well-managed energy transition, a plan that will focus on people, lives, and livelihoods, and a plan that will finally fix climate finance. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa contributes just 3% of global emissions. Yet, we all know that it suffers some of the worst consequences. Droughts, floods, and failed harvests have exposed 1/5 of Africa's people to hunger, tripled the number of people displaced in the last 3 years, and is dragging down Africa's GDP growth by at least 5% every year. But there is also another narrative that unfortunately is overlooked and in a big way undermined and underestimated, and that needs to get out there. And that is Africa is also a beacon of hope, filled with potential and a global example of what pro-climate and nature-positive development should and must look like. Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative is enhancing food security and stimulating green jobs across the Horn of Africa. The countries of the Congo Basin are protecting vital rainforests and helping preserve the world's natural carbon sinks. Kenya is closing on its goal of 100% clean energy by 2030. And the number of sub-Saharan countries in Africa with significant installed solar power has grown 6 times in the last 5 years. This great continent is rich in the resources that can help not just Africa, but the entire world transition to a zero carbon and high growth future. That said, we first need to deal with some realities, and we must accept to come to terms with these facts. Almost half of Africa's population still have no access to electricity. Almost 1 billion people lack clean cooking fuels, and this energy gap will only increase as Africa's population grows. These basic energy needs must be met, and meeting them with low-carbon, nature-positive solutions will meet Africa's development and climate goals at the same time. And the key to making this happen is, of course, finance, and finance, and finance. This finance must be made available. This must be made accessible, and this finance must be made affordable. According to the African Development Bank, $250 billion annually is required to meet Africa's climate finance needs. Africa only receives 12% of that amount, and less than 2% of that is going to adaptation. We can all agree that this is neither just or equitable. We must agree that it is a big missed opportunity. The World Bank estimates that every dollar spent on climate adaptation brings an average of $4 in benefits. It simply makes sense for Africa to get a fairer share of global climate finance. That is why I am calling on donor countries to close out the $100 billion pledge they made over a decade ago and to replenish the Green Climate Fund. I will continue to press on these issues. I am also calling on donors to double adaptation finance by 2025, and for all parties to transform the global goal on adaptation from theory and text into real action and tangible results. We also need early pledges for the Loss and Damage Fund to help vulnerable countries recover from severe climate impacts that they already are exploring and experiencing. What was promised in Sharm el-Sheikh must be delivered in Dubai. We can no longer accept pledges and announcements without clear roadmaps of implementation. In parallel, we must upgrade our financial architecture. We need a complete upgrade. In fact, we need a surgical intervention of the global financial architecture that was built for a completely different era. IFIs and MDBs must step up, and they must up their game. They need to raise concessional capital and lower debt burdens. They need to attract and leverage private capital at a multiple, and the multilateral, public, and private sectors need to mesh together and work as true partners to accelerate the delivery of practical solutions and real impactful projects on the ground. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the United Arab Emirates has applied this model of genuine partnership to invest in clean energy projects in 70 countries around the world. We have always chosen to meet global challenges by building bridges and working with like-minded partners on solutions in the pursuit of progress and sustainable development. That is why I am pleased to answer the call made by African leaders to seize the opportunity of green growth. And today, it is my true honor to announce a new initiative between the United Arab Emirates and Africa that aims to unlock Africa's capacity for sustainable prosperity. Your Excellencies, the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, Etihad Credit Insurance, Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and EMEA Power will join with Africa 50 as a strategic partner under the guidance of the UAE and African leadership to develop 15 gigawatt of clean power by 2030. Working together, we will deploy, and by working together, we will deploy $4.5 billion that will catalyze at least an additional $12.5 billion from multilateral public and private sources. It is our ambition that this will launch a new transformative partnership to jumpstart a pipeline of bankable clean energy projects in this very important continent. This initiative will target countries with clear transition plans, robust regulatory frameworks, and a real commitment to putting the necessary grid infrastructure in place. It will clearly demonstrate the commercial case for clean energy investments across this very important continent. This initiative is designed to work with Africa and for Africa. It will act as a scalable model that can and should be replicated. And it will support COP28's global goal of tripling renewable energy by 2030. And here, let me take the opportunity to thank His Excellency, the President of Kenya, and his government, and the African Union Commission and the EU Presidency for championing this goal alongside COP28. It's through their leadership that they are choosing a path that makes economic and climate sense at the same time. And let me extend an open invitation to all Africa's leaders to join us at COP28 to help mark a new, ambitious era for Africa's sustainable growth. Ladies and gentlemen, as COP28 approaches, I am determined that it is a turning point that delivers for everyone, everywhere. We don't want to leave anyone behind. Climate change is a global fight, and it demands a global solution. If Africa loses, we all lose. And if Africa succeeds, we all succeed. Progress for one is progress for all. Let's unite, act, and deliver to turn the rhetoric into real results. Let's turn pledges into tangible projects on the ground. And let's launch a new and optimistic future that puts the world on a climate-positive pathway and offers an opportunity for all to prosper. I thank you all, and I look forward to receiving you at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi Declaration, like I indicated, will find itself to the UN General Assembly, and we are happy to have with us the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, who is both a politician and a diplomat who will guide the discussions and midwife the contents of our declaration to find itself into UN resolutions. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, dear President William Ruto, thank you very much for your initiative, your enthusiasm, and your leadership that brought us together. Asante sana. Excellencies, friends, an injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities here in Africa. This continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures. Extreme heat, ferocious floods, and tens of thousands dead from devastating droughts. The blow inflicted on development is all around, with growing hunger and displacement, shattered infrastructure, systems stretched to the limit, all aggravated by climate chaos not of your making. It is still possible to avoid the worst effects of climate change, but only with a quantum leap in climate action. The people of Africa and people everywhere need action to respond to deadly climate extremes. First, we need far greater climate ambition, with countries hitting fast forward and massively accelerating action to limit temperature rises and impacts. And the largest emitters must lead the charge, in line with my Climate Solidarity Pact and acceleration agenda. And here, from a low-emitting continent, Africa, I make a very strong appeal to the large emitters, to the G20 countries, responsible for 80% of the emissions that will be meeting this week in Delhi. Assume your responsibilities. Developed countries must commit to reaching net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040. and large emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, with support from developed countries to do so. And it's time to break our addiction to fossil fuels and invest in a just and equitable transition. We need to see credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and by 2040 for the rest of the world. And we need ambitious renewable energy goals in line with 1.5-degree limit. And we must bring affordable electricity to everyone on Earth, and particularly in Africa, while simultaneously reaching net zero electricity by 2035 in developed countries and 2040 elsewhere. Second, reaching these targets requires climate justice. Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund. And all countries must also operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund proposed at COP28 this year. Every person on Earth must be covered by an early warning system by 2027 by implementing the action plan we launched last year. And 6 out of every 10 Africans currently lack access to these systems. The Early Warning for All Africa Action Plan, launched yesterday under the leadership of the African Union, will be critical to addressing these needs. And more broadly, we need a course correction in the global financial system so that it supports accelerated climate action in the context of sustainable development. And we can't achieve one without the other. And this means an international financial system that is able to provide an effective debt relief mechanism that supports payment suspensions, longer lending terms, lower rates. And it means recapitalizing and changing the business model of multilateral development banks so they can massively leverage private finance at affordable rates to help developing countries build truly sustainable economies. The global financial system must be reformed to be an ally of developing countries as they turbocharge the just and equitable green transition that leaves no one behind. Which brings me to my third point, making Africa a world leader in renewable energy and green growth. This continent is rich in renewable energy potential. Africa is home to 30% of the mineral reserves that are critical to renewable and low-carbon technologies like solar power, electric vehicles, and battery storage. Of course, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past. To truly benefit all Africans, the production and trade of these critical minerals must be sustainable, transparent, and just across every link of the supply chain, with maximum added value produced within African countries. African leadership is also helping to generate innovative green economies anchored in renewable power. From the Greater Horn of Africa, where over 85% of electricity generation comes from renewables, including massive hydropower projects in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, to wind and solar projects in Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, to Mozambique, which gets nearly 100% of its energy from green and sustainable sources, to the increased installation of large-scale solar projects, including in South Sudan. At the same time, Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 2% of global investments in renewable energy over the last 2 decades. Now is the time to bring together African countries with developed countries, financial institutions, and technological companies to create a